Hey there. Today we're going to migrate an existing Contentful project into Payload version 3.0. Now, even if you're not migrating from Contentful, or if you're not migrating at all, still stick around because there might be a few interesting concepts that apply not only to migrations, but to Payload 3.0 in general. Before we get started, why would you even want to migrate to Payload? So I'm just going to touch on it briefly, but basically Payload is an open source project. You can host it yourself, or you can go for Payload Cloud, which is the hosting service that Payload offers. It's fully TypeScript. You can configure it through code, so you don't have to click around in any online platform. You can just write code, configure your data structure, and you're good to go. Now, it also has something very unique called blocks that, for example, Contentful doesn't have. We're going to talk about that later. Also, it is very, very extendable. You have full control over custom hooks, custom endpoints, very fine-graded access control. And that way you can basically, it's not only a CMS, but you can extend it into a fully fledged backend for whatever application you might be building. Also, since the new version dropped, version 3.0, it's now a native Next.js app, which means that you can put it into your front-end project pretty much, have everything in one repository, which gives you, full type safety. You can go to the database directly from your front end in your React server components, and you can even deploy your backend for free on Vercel using serverless functions. But you can still run it as a standalone app as well, which is very important. So if you're using other frameworks than Next.js, you can still run Payload as an independent backend. Now, before we dive into the migration, just 30 seconds of theory because it's important to understand. Payload works a little bit differently than Contentful. In Contentful, you have something called content types, which might be a page where you define that it has a specific name or a specific content. It might be a hero banner, which is basically one of the sections on your page, your hero section. It might be your header, where you define your navigation links, or it might be a product, where you define a schema. So, for example, you say a product has a name, a description, a price, but it's all within one level, basically. Payload has three different things. First and foremost, it has collections, where you can basically store, you can say, I create a collection for a product. So I give it has a name, it has a description, it has a price. And then I can create documents in that collection. So actual products. But you also have something called blocks. And this is very important for building pages. So in Contentful, the blocks of your website, so for example, your hero section or your footer, it's just a content type. It's the same thing as a product, for example. In Payload, you have a pages collection, for example, and a page can have a layout. And this layout can contain blocks, which are basically the building blocks of your page, like the hero section, the call to action section, whatever. So what you have here is you can separate the actual visible parts on your website from the collections where data is stored. And then the third thing that you have in Payload is globals, which is very similar to collections, but it might make sense to introduce them, for example, if you have a header and a footer for a website. So in Contentful, it's basically just a content type, and then you create, one element in that content type, but you could also create multiple, which might make sense if you have multiple headers, but for most of the pages, you have one header, one footer. So to make this a lot more simple, you can just create a global for a header and a footer. So this is data that lives globally, and it's not a collection. You can just define one header and one footer. Now, in case you're asking yourself, no, I'm not James. My name is Sandro. I actually come from the All About Payload YouTube channel, and it's an honor for us to start producing additional content for the official Payload channel now. So let's dive into our migration. First, I'm going to show you our current project in Contentful. So I'm going to open up Contentful. I should already be logged in. Now we have to wait a bit. until everything loads. All right, so this is my template project here. I have some assets, I have content, and I have multiple content types. So I work around to basically distinguish between different types of content is putting an icon in front of the name. So those ones are the collections where we actually store data. So here we store products, we store persons, and we store product features. Now those are our website blocks actually, which we will later turn into actual blocks in Payload. For example, the hero banner or a quote component, a text block. And then we have our pages, which is our accessibility page, pricing page, about us, the pages that are actually displayed in the front end. And then we have footer, menu, a menu group, and a navigation menu basically for header and footer. Now let's open up our terminal, go into the folder where we want to create our Payload project. And here I'm just going to say npx create payload app. And right now I still have to specify beta because Payload 3.0 is still in beta, but it might be out as a stable release when you're watching this video. So just do a little bit of research. And now we're being asked, how should we name our project? I'm just going to call it Contentful Migration. I'm going to choose a blank template and the MongoDB database. So now we just need to wait for the dependencies to be installed. As soon as that is done, we can cd into our project and open up VS Code. The first thing that we're going to do here is export all the content from our Contentful project. Luckily, Contentful gives us a handy CLI tool that you can install with Brew or whatever package manager you're using. It's called Contentful CLI. I already have it installed. As soon as you've installed it, you just say Contentful login. That will enable you to log in into your Contentful account, which I've already done as well. And as soon as you've done that, I'm going to say Contentful space export. And now I'm going to specify the space ID that I'll have to copy. You can find it if you go back to Contentful and check the URL. You can see Contentful spaces, and this one is your space ID. So I'm just going to paste it in here. And one important flag that we have to set as well, we have to set download assets, because that will also download all media elements on our disk. So when I do this, this will run through everything. It shouldn't take too long for this small project. It will download all assets. And when that is done, I will have a Contentful export here, which is a JSON file. I'm going to explain it in a second. And I also have a folder here. In that is my space ID, and in here is all the media assets that I have in my Contentful space. If we take a look at our export, by the way, I'm just going to rename it to export.json because it's simpler. It might be huge depending on your project. It will contain a few arrays. The first one is content types. This just specifies which content types you've created in Contentful. Tags are not that important. Editor interfaces neither. The most important part is entries, because this is where all of our data that we want to export automatically lives. You also have assets, which is basically just a list of your assets that you've uploaded. But we also have the assets itself in our folder. And then you have locals, which you might have multiple of. We can ignore the last two content types because we don't have any webhooks set up and we don't have any custom access control. If you have this set up, you will need to migrate it manually anyways. So let's start by adding our pages collection into our new project. In Contentful, in this project, we only have one content type, which is related to pages, but you might have multiple content types that are all pages, depending on how complex your project is. As I said, in Payload, we have content blocks. So we will only have one single collection that has pages. And every page has a flexible layout. So I'm going to go ahead into collection. I'm going to create a new collection called pages. You can do it in JavaScript, you can do it in TypeScript, doesn't matter. I'm going to export const pages, give it the slug for pages. I'm going to skip all things that are unnecessary now. Obviously you want to add labels, etc. But I'm just going to add fields. And for the fields, I'm going to add an internal name, which is just, not a string, it's a text. And has a label, and it will also be required. And then we will have a layout. Now the layout, this is where the magic comes in, is type blocks. This is basically an array, but we can only add blocks in here. So the label will be layout, and then we have a blocks field. This will be an empty array for now, but in here we are going to add our block data structures. So our block definitions, like the duplex component, hero banner, in here. So let's add our pages collection to the payload config. And a quick tip, if you're using JavaScript, if you're using TypeScript, the auto import should work out of the box. If not, you will have to go into tsconfig.json, and under include, you will also have to add the JavaScript files. So I'm just going to say ** or asterisk JS and JSX. Now this should fix my auto import issue here. And at the top, I'll also have to add @ts no check. Now we can just go ahead and do npm run dev, and that will start our payload dev server on localhost 3000. So we can just access it by calling localhost 3000/admin. Now, when we open it up the first time, we will have to create our first user. I'm going to say dev user password 12345, very secure. And as you can see here, we now have access to our payload dashboard with our pages here. I will leave the pages collection as it is for now because I want to start by migrating the assets. So in order to do that, we're going to create another collection. I'm going to call it media. You can call it whatever you want. And the cool thing about Payload is you can actually create multiple collections for your assets. So you're not restricted to one asset collection. You could create a separate collection for images and for videos or for user uploaded files. It doesn't matter. You can have hundreds of them. So I'm just going to say export const media, give it a slug of media. And the only thing that I have to watch out for is I'm going to say upload true. Now, in this video, for the sake of simplicity, we're not going to use any plugin for storage. So by default, it will just save it onto our local file system. But there are multiple plugins. You could use S3 storage, for example. Soon you will be able to use the Versal blob storage. You can use Bunny CDN. You can basically use whatever you want. If there's no plugin for it, you can build one yourself or ask the community to build one for you. So for the fields, I'm going to specify, you can specify like the alt text for images, whatever you want. For now, I'm just going to specify the old ID, or I'm going to call it Contentful ID. This one will be important for our migration because we have to store the old ID that the content had in order to later change the references so that the linking still works. So it will be type text, has a label Contentful ID, and that should be it for now. So I'm going to add it to our payload config. Below pages, I'm going to say media, And the cool thing is about Payload, it now has hot module reloading. So as soon as I click outside, it will save automatically, and the media collection will automatically pop up in our admin panel. It doesn't need to reload any server like in version 2, just happens immediately. So let's write a migration script for our assets. I'm going to go back into our repository and I'm going to create a new file called migrate assets.js. This will be a simple script. It just contains an anonymous async function that is executed. You can do this however you want. You can specify it as a normal function and then call it async. So one of the cool new features that Payload has is that you can access Payload from basically anywhere. You can access it from a standalone script. So I've just pasted 2 lines of code here. This enables you to get the payload object, which you can then use to call payload.find, payload.create, whatever you want. You basically have full access to the payload local API. So I just have to import our 2 helper functions here, import config and get payload with the config that we awaited here. And I just have to specify where the payload config lives. To test this out, I'm just going to console log all the users that we currently have. So I'm going to say const users equals await payload.find collection users, and I'm not going to specify anything else, and then I'm going to say console log users. One important thing that we have to do if we want to execute the script, I'm going to install globally, but you can install it however you want, a library called TSX. That is basically a TypeScript runner for Node that helps you to execute the file and also enables you to inject the environment variables and the tsconfig file into our script here so that everything works as expected. So I'm just going to install it here, but I should have already installed it. So now I can call TSX and I can specify with a flag env file, and I'm going to specify the location of my environment variables, which is in the same directory. So I'm just going to say .env, and I'm going to call the migrate assets.js. So let's see. Yeah, and as you can see, everything seems to work fine. We get back our docs with the 1 user that is currently registered in our payload project. So let's adjust our migration script so that it actually does something and uploads our assets to payload. For that, I have cleared out the commands before, and I'm going to paste in a code snippet that I'm just going to explain to you real quick. So what we are doing here, first of all, we have to import something. We have to import the export data, okay? I just called it export data, which lives in our export.json file. So what we're doing here is we're mapping through export data.assets. As you can see here, this is where our assets are stored. So if we map through it, we basically get the asset ID, which is stored in an asset under sys and then the ID. This is also the ID of this folder, so we need it. Now I'm just console logging the asset ID. And now obviously you can make this smaller. I just split it into multiple lines so that it's easier to understand. I also still have to import the FS module. And what I'm doing here is I'm reading the directory. So for every asset ID, I'm reading, for example, this directory. Now, this is a little bit hidden, but there's actually another directory, which we are reading here. And then we are grabbing the first file in this directory, because there's always just one file in there. And then we are reading this file as a buffer. So now we have the file buffer. And everything that we have to do now is we're going to call payload.create, specify the collection media, and we're going to specify a file object here, which, and this is important, it needs to have data, name, and size, okay? And as an additional data, we're going to supply the Contentful ID, so the old ID, which is the asset ID. So if we go back into our project. Under media, you can see it is empty. And now I'm going to run our script here. So I'm going to kill our development server for now. I'm going to run our migrate assets file again, our script. This can take a while, depending on how many assets you have. But if we go back, restart our development server and check our platform, we can now see all of our assets uploaded into Payload. And since we're not using any plugin, it created a folder here called media, where it stores all the files, all the images. And as you can see, we kept all the old file names as well. So let's move on with migrating our actual data collections. In this case, our product and product features. Also persons, but I'm not going to focus on them. I'm going to focus on products and product features. So before we can import the data, we have to actually create the collections and create the content model. We could, in theory, automate this because in our export, if we check our export, we do have our content types here. But I don't think it makes a lot of sense because Payload works a little bit different. For example, in Payload, you can specify a field to be displayed in the sidebar to have another layout, or you can conditionally hide it or show it depending on the value of another field. So I think it makes sense to just do it by hand, do it manually, and take it as an opportunity to refactor your code, maybe make it a little bit easier, a little bit easier to read, a little bit more structured. You can also use the tabs in Payload, so you can put different fields and different tabs, which makes it less chaotic, less of a mess. So I'm just going to create two collections now, products and product features. And if I need any assistance with how my content model looks like, I can just go to Contentful, look for my... I'm actually going to start with the product feature topic. So I can actually just look up my content model, copy it in there. Internal name, short description, and long description. Okay, I just skipped through that part. One important note, the name of the field needs to match the ID in Contentful. So if you check the internal name field, click on edit, you can see the field ID here. And this field ID needs to match our name here. Otherwise, it will make the migration more complicated. So I'll just create the products as well. Going to find it here. So if we are recreating a media field, we will have to specify it as a type upload, and we have to give it a relationship so that Payload knows where the actual file is stored. So in this case, this is media. For the relationship or the references, we are going to say type relationship, and it's important to specify has many as true because we have it specified in here as well, which means it can include multiple references. To show you what I mean by it makes sense to restructure things a little bit, let's display the price in our sidebar in Payload. So what I can do is I can say admin position sidebar. So if we check back into our new project, and we have to restart our development server. Let's do this in a separate terminal so that it just keeps running. So npm run dev. So if we check out our product or create a new product, we can actually structure it in a way that the price is displayed in the sidebar, for example. There are a lot more things. This is a very simple example, but that's why it makes sense to rethink the structure a little bit. Now let's migrate our data. To start with product features, I'm going to create a separate file, migrate assets, and I'm going to call it migrate data.js. We can copy it or copy the first one for now, but obviously we're going to replace the code in here. So I just pasted in a code snippet that I'm going to explain real quick. By the way, you're going to find all code snippets in the description below. What we're doing here is very similar to before. We're basically mapping through the entries of our export data, and we're skipping everything that isn't a product feature. So here we need to check for the ID of the product feature content model that we have in Contentful here. So if we copy this ID, it's topic product feature. Now, there's one thing that makes it complicated. We are migrating rich text here, okay? And the rich text structure in Contentful is different from the one in Payload. In the future, there might exist a helper that makes it a lot easier. For now, we have to do a little workaround. So Contentful provides a library that lets us convert the Contentful rich text to the Slate.js rich text format. You can install this tool by calling, you can install it by calling npm install @contentful Slate.js adapter. Okay, I already got it installed, so I don't need to do it. What this will do is it will convert your Contentful rich text into Slate.js rich text. So this is basically what I'm doing here. There is only one issue. So I added another custom function. It doesn't format the note names correctly. So it will give you paragraph, but we will actually need P for that, or heading 1, which will be H1. So I'm just mapping through all of the notes after it has been converted, okay? And I'm basically just changing the names. This list is not complete. You might run into other names that you might have to add to this function, but I'm going to put it in the description as well so you can adjust it for yourself. So let's just go ahead and run this thing by calling our migration script again. Important, we are now calling our migrate data.js, not the migrate assets function. So it doesn't give me any output here. I could basically console log my index and check the progress, but it's not that many entries, so I think it's just done. If I go back to my project and refresh, yeah, we should now have our product features imported into Payload. There's only one issue, that Payload version 3, you can still use the Slate.js rich text editor, but it's basically the old version. The new rich text editor is lexical. So out of the box, lexical doesn't support the Slate.js content that we provided it with, but there is a workaround. So in order to fix this issue, we're going back into our product features. We have our 2 rich text fields here. We're going to add another code. And we're basically just calling an export that we get from Payload, lexical editor. And we have to add the Slate to lexical feature. I'll have to do this with both fields. Restart, which will happen automatically. And now if we refresh, we should actually see our rich text here. Now, as soon as we go ahead, do some changes and save it, it will save it in a new format. So this is basically just for the first time when you're opening it, so that you don't have to migrate any text manually. And then as soon as you save it, it will automatically convert it into the new lexical format. One thing I forgot here is we need to save the old ID because we need it in order to link product features to the products later. So let me just delete all the product features again, which is very fast. And we need to adjust our migration script to also include the Contentful ID, which I guess is entry.sys.id, but let me check it in our export. So entries, entry sys ID, yeah, that should do the trick. And obviously we also need to add the ID to our schema in here. So let's just rerun our migration script and check if our ID appears now. Yes, and here we have our old Contentful ID. So let's move on with the products. For the products, let me check the data structure. We have the two names, we have description, we have an image, and most importantly, we have the features. In order to migrate our product data, I have adjusted the script a little bit. So we're still mapping through the entries of our export data, but now we're checking for the topic product ID. We also only have one description for the product, so that makes it easier. But we have two very important fields. The first one is the featured image, which is a relationship to an asset, so an image in this case. And we have features, which is a relationship field that has many. So in here, we link many product features. The core problem here is that we need to replace the old Contentful ID with the new ID of the doc that we created in Payload. In order to do this, before I map through the entries, I fetch all media documents and I fetch all product features without any limits. I could also fetch them inside of my loop with the specific ID, but that would make it less efficient, especially if we have large collections. So in here, what I'm doing for the featured image, I'm mapping through all the media documents and I'm finding the one that has the Contentful ID. And I'm replacing it with the new Payload ID that of the doc that we just created. Also, just one side note, as you can see here, we're only migrating the English content version. If we have multiple locales, this is basically the same thing. You just have to adjust the locales, and when you're creating the document in Payload, you will have to add the local to import it localized. Now, for the features, we're basically doing the same thing. We're just mapping through the feature IDs here, basically. So we can find the old feature ID in feature.sys.id. And for it, we have to find our new feature entry and we return the ID of the feature entry. Also, I just added the Contentful ID for the products as well. You never know when you might need it. So let's run our migration script here. And let's go back to our payload. And now, as you can see, we have our products here. If we go to our Coin Classic, the internal name has been migrated, name has been migrated, price as well, the image, and also the features, which is a has many relationship. We still have the issue with lexical, obviously, because I need to add the same code snippet here to support the old Slate data. Sorry, not pages, products, description. So let's refresh. Yeah, now it should work. As you can see, I just created a demo rich text. It migrates all the headings, underline works, bold, italic, list items, numbered items. Like I said, you might extend this if you have any edge cases or any other things that you need to migrate. The featured image worked. What I'm going to say for the features, because it only displays the ID here in our product features, I'm going to add an admin attribute and I'm going to say use as title. Use as title. I'm going to use the internal name as the title. So if we go back, it now displays the internal title that we gave it so that it's just a little bit easier and less chaotic to look at. Last but not least, we're going to migrate our actual pages. As I've said, this doesn't really make sense to do automatically because the way that we build pages in Payload is just different. So in Contentful, we are on our home page, one of our pages. We have our data structure here. And as you can see, we have a top section, we have the page content, an extra section. This will be a lot simpler in Payload. It will just be a layout, which will consist of the building blocks that we want. So One thing I still have to add to our pages here is the slug, because I missed it. Obviously, every page needs a slug. It will just be text, it will be required, and I'm going to place it in the sidebar. To make the video short, I'm just going to migrate one of our actual blocks here. And I'm going to choose the hero banner. So I'm going into our content model. As you can see, these are our fields here. And what I'm going to do in Payload, I'm going to create a new folder here called blocks. So what I like to do is I like to separate collections from blocks, like I said, and blocks for me are part of a page. A page has a layout attribute, and in this layout you can basically stack together multiple blocks. For example, the hero block, a call to action block, and an about us block. And you can rearrange them, you can delete them, you can do whatever you want basically. So in here I'm going to create the hero banner component block, which has the ID component hero banner. It's always easier if you give them the same ID, but if you want, you can change things up. So hero banner component. It's called component here. It doesn't really matter for now. So I'm going to export hero banner component, but I'm also going to give it the slug component hero banner. And it's a const, of course. Now I just have to add the fields back in. For the sake of simplicity, I'm only going to use 3 or 4 fields, but it's the same thing for all other fields as well. So here's our new schema. I just added the 4 most important fields. And now what I have to do, instead of adding this as a collection or something, I'm going to go into my pages collection, and under layout, I'm going to add it as a block. So I'm going to import hero banner component. And if we go back to Payload now, click on pages, create a new page, we can call it homepage, give it a slug home. And now if we click on add layout, we can actually see our blocks here. So the more blocks you add, the more appear here. You can search for them. And now we're just going to add our component here. And now we can give it an internal name. Actually, we don't even need that internal name. So let's remove it real quick. So now it's just a headline, hot module reload. I love it. Headline, this is a hero block. This is the description. And I'm just going to choose an existing image that we have. Click on save. Now we have our page saved here. And here we can basically just stack different blocks on top of each other. Let me just add a second block so that I can show you. So I just added a second block, a quote block. I'm going to add to the page as well, quote block, going back here. And now we can add this as our second block. This is an amazing quote. Choose another image, click on save. So this is now our blocks. I can add another hero block if I want. Headline 2. These fields are not required, so I don't have to save them. And now I have my block. And this is my layout on the page. And now I can just rearrange it, delete my, this one, for example. I can just remove it, move my hero banner back to the top and save it. This is how we build flexible pages in Payload. There's one advantage that Contentful has. So if you want to reuse a component, let's say you have a call to action component, and every call to action component has the same headline, the same button, and you want to place it on every single page that you have. With this approach, this is a lot of work because you have to add the component and add and copy the content for all pages. But we can build an easy workaround, or it's not even a workaround. We can build the functionality into Payload very easily by just creating another collection, and we're going to call it block templates. I'm just going to scaffold it real quick. So slug will be block templates. I'm going to give it a name so that we know how it's called, what it is. And then I'm going to specify, actually we can just copy it from our pages. I can just copy the layout field. And here I have to add our components. All right. And I have to add it to our collection config block templates. Now, if we go back, what we can do in our block templates, we can create a new block template. So let's say standard hero section. Okay, if you want to have the exact same hero section for every page that you have. And now we can add a layout. So I can, or no, it makes more sense for the quotes actually. Standard quote. So I'm going to add the quote block. This is our standard quote. I'm going to add another image. Click on save. And now we have this template. The only thing that is missing, we need to create a sort of wrapper block where we can put in the template and link that on every page that we want to link it. So I'm going to create another block template block. This is not a good name, but I think you get what I mean. Block template block. And once again, I have to make it a variable. And the only fields that it has is one, which is the template. Okay. So this will be a relationship field with the relation to our block templates. And I have to add this to our pages. Now what we can do in our pages, if we want to edit our homepage, we can actually add the block template block, call it whatever you want. And in this block, we can specify our template. Doesn't have a name here. We can just go back here, admin, use as title, name. Now it should actually display the name. Yeah, the standard quote. We can click on save. And now we have the standard quote in our homepage. But now let's say we want to create about page and we want to use the same quote. We just add the block again, select the standard quote, and now we have this exact block template with the exact content in 2 pages. And if we want to change the content, all we have to do is we have to edit our block template. This is our standard quote. It is new, and this will be reflected in every page that we imported our block. To round things up, if you decide to turn a collection into a global, for example, here we have footer menu. In Contentful, we can, in theory, create multiple footer menus, but maybe you just want to have one on a global thing for your entire website. What we can do is, next to collections in the source folder, we can create globals. And this is very similar to collections. So I'm going to create a global footer. Do the same thing as I would for a collection, slug footer fields. Just going to give it one field, copyright text. And what I'm doing now is I'm adding it to the payload config, not as a collection, but as a global. That's the only difference. Footer. So now if we go back to our payload, we can see on a globals footer, we can put in a copyright text, 10x, or yeah, let's do all about payload / payload CMS, whatever, save it. And now we have a global footer data that we can retrieve through the API / API / globals, whatever. So obviously you will have to do this manually as well. You don't have to, you can just basically do the same thing that we did for the data collection. You can do it for the footers, you can do it for everything that you want here. I just wanted to show you this option because it might make your project more structured. This will be it for today's video. If you have any feedback or you have a very specific scenario, a more complex project that we didn't cover here, feel free to let us know in the comments. We might try to help you out there, or we might even record a follow-up video if there are enough requests. Apart from that, we're happy for any feedback about the video. And yeah, apart from that, take care and see you in the next video.